Hello and welcome to Decoding the New Economy. Today we're joined by Reid, Carlberg, Senior Director of Evangelism at Salesforce.com. Reid, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks very much for having me.
Now, Senior Evangelist, that's a pretty good role.
Yeah, I highly recommend an evangelism position to everybody. What I do is I go around and help people understand what the Salesforce.com platform is. I help people understand what kind of things they can do on it, and then I help them bring their ideas into reality.
Now, you're involved with the Makers Movement. I see on your website you've got some pretty cool things of using Salesforce One to control remote control devices.
Yeah, it's been a fun thing for me. I kind of started off as a hobby a few years ago. I had a little bit of free time, and I connected my model trains to an Arduino, and then I connected that Arduino to Salesforce,
right,
and then I put that up on the internet.
Yeah.
And out of that grew the Connected Device Lab at Dreamforce 13.
Right.
And out of that grew a bunch of experiments, such as how you control your fleet of quadcopter drones from Salesforce One, which is a super, I'm not sure it's the best idea in the world, but it's a super fun way to look at the product and a super fun way to kind of think about potential things that you can do.
Now that Connected Device Lab at Dreamforce 13, that was a really interesting little corner. What did you get much out of that?
Yeah, actually. So I spent months putting that together. That was kind of my baby.
Okay.
And what I ended up doing was having a whole bunch of raw material, right, for people to come in and put it together. And then what happened was I had it displayed, and then I had workshops. So we had like 15 partners that were there talking to people. We had 21 workshops where people get hands-on with all this equipment. And what we did was we walked all these enterprise developers through what it's like to really think about the Internet of Things. So it was a fantastic experience.
Now, what I thought was very interesting with that too was the the international focus on it. There was particularly the Europeans. How do you find the international focus with the Internet of Things?
There's the Internet of Things is not located in any one place, right? Like people all over the world are simultaneously discovering, experimenting, and innovating. And one of the great things about working with a company like Salesforce is you get a chance to meet people all over the place. And so Labellium is a company out of Spain. So they were there, and we had a chance to kind of work with them. There were a few others that stepped in, and basically we just ran into them through other projects that we were working on, told them that we were having the event, that we'd love to have them participate, and people jumped on board and really produced some outstanding examples and gave some great demonstrations.
That's interesting with the Internet of Things that you're putting together all this data, and a company like Salesforce is trying to process that data. How do you see that going in the next few years?
That's a really interesting question, right? So when I think about what the Internet of Things is, there's this complex value chain, right? So there's really 5 portions to it. There's the sensing or the actuating, which is actually sitting out there in the field someplace. There's the connectivity between the sensor and some sort of collection point, and that's what you're talking about. Then there's this notion of where you would actually analyze that information. To get to the really meaningful portion, which is how you act on that information. Now, from a way to actually collect all that information and process it, usually we recommend working with one of our partners. We have a lot of great partners all over the world to do that. But when it comes to having that information as something you can act on, that's really where Salesforce comes into play. So they all know how to get that information right next to the customer, where sales reps and support people can really make intelligent decisions.
So what's been the project that you've seen so far that's excited you the most?
Oh boy, that's a good question. So there's a few of them that are really exciting. So one is at Dreamforce 13, we talked a lot about New England Biolabs. So New England Biolabs is this existing company. They had a relationship with various research laboratories, and they had actual equipment that was deployed into those research laboratories. But they still didn't have a good connection with their customer. So what they were able to do was, using Salesforce and the Salesforce One platform, they were able to actually put a device on these freezers. They were able to require researchers to log in, and then they were able to actually track which researcher was using which enzyme or chemical or whatnot as part of their research. So it was a great solution that really showed how you could tie everything together in real time. And then it also gave them a much stronger connection with their customer.
Now with the customers, that's an interesting angle on it, because from what you've just described, that seems to me as a real supply chain type thing. How do you see it with the customer-facing side of that?
Tell me more what you mean.
Okay, with the so how can you see the customer plugging into that sort of thing? Say making a decision on, say down the track, you could be asking the milk in this fridge at this supermarket is fresher than the one at the supermarket up the road.
Yeah. So, that's a good question because in this particular case, there's only so many of these enzyme freezers in a given research laboratory.
Yeah.
So it's fairly static, right? They're not going to be picking and choosing too much which supplier to go to. But when you start to think about the potential of the Internet of Things, and you start to think about, the kind of information you can surface, it does provide great power for consumers to be able to look at the world with more data and make more informed decisions. So, you bring up the example of milk, right? That's certainly out there. You could do it with fresh food. You could do it with, there's a lot of places where you can get prepackaged sandwiches, that kind of thing.
Sure.
And if you had something which said, hey, these sandwiches just arrived, 5 minutes ago and were made 15 minutes ago or an hour ago as compared to these which have been there for a day, where are you going to go?
Sure.
Right. I think there's a lot of potential for that kind of thing.
Yeah. So, what sort of areas are you seeing have got the best potential at the moment?
Right now, some of the stuff that excites me the most is healthcare.
Right.
There's a lot of work that kind of happens. When you're in this fun experimental stage. There's goofy projects that come up. You mentioned my quadcopters, right?
Right.
It's a fun project. It helps you kind of envision things, but it has sort of a minimum impact on people's lives. Where you start to think that things could really make a difference is when you're working with like a major healthcare provider and they're taking, for example, a piece of equipment that's used by kids who are really sick, and they're saying, how do we change that experience, right? And that is where it can have a huge impact. It has a huge impact on people's lives. It has a huge impact on a huge ecosystem of people. Those are the kind of projects that I think are really worth concentrating on. Yeah.
Now, just to go back to your own career path.
Sure.
So you've how did you get to become the senior evangelist at Salesforce? I've seen a presentation you did on getting sacked from...
you saw my I got fired presentation.
I got fired, that was the one,
Yeah, there you go. It's funny, so my career trajectory has been a little bit non-traditional. When I graduated from college, I graduated with a degree in Japanese, which was super fun, right? I learned a lot. And then when I got out of college, I wanted to do something else.
Right.
So it took me a while to figure that out. I wound up, a lot of people start off as a developer and then transition to a sales engineer and then become an account executive, fairly common. I went straight to becoming an account executive and skipped the rest of it. So, I was doing sales for a company, which was great. I liked a lot about it, but there's something that there's something that happens when you're a developer and you realize that with your brain and with your hands, you can make something work, right? And it's not just talking about it. It's something that you actually thought of, you implement, and then people's lives are different. And that was really the most attractive thing for me. So obviously I like to talk about it. And so when you code and then you like to talk about code, they say, oh, you should be an evangelist.
Right.
So that's essentially how that comes into being.
So you travel around the world talking to various groups. What do you see in the different international communities with the developers and so on? Do you see any differences regionally?
Yeah, I actually don't see as many differences as you would think.
Right.
When you start talking to developers, they all have this understanding that their work can really affect the world in a very interesting way. What you do see is a little different sometimes in motivations, but that's not really geography driven.
Right.
But, there's also a lot of people out there who look at it and they say, how do I change the world? And it's not a geographic difference, it's just a personal difference. Right? Both those are completely valid. I love working with both camps. To some degree, I sell a little bit on what it's like to be a developer in the Salesforce ecosystem. That hits the first group very well. And then when I talk to the second group about how quickly they can make a difference, that hits kind of a lot of issues for them too. And it's really rewarding for me to help them grow their careers.
So what would be your advice to somebody at college at the moment that was looking at a similar sort of career path?
So first of all, don't start off trying to be an evangelist. Start off trying to be a developer. The evangelism comes with time, and if that's something that you're really passionate about, you're just going to start doing it. Don't wait for somebody to call you one. The developer community is actually really good about that. They're really welcoming of people standing up and just talking, telling about what worked, what didn't work, and being open about it. But my biggest advice to the current people who are in uni today, who are talking about thinking about what their career might be. Don't be afraid to get your hands dirty. Don't be afraid to get in and do the hard stuff. Don't be afraid to fail. You don't have to try it. Have a nice broad base that you can draw from, experiment. get to know the world a little bit, and you're going to find that there's a lot of interesting ways to build solutions out there. You're probably going to come over to Salesforce at some point, because I'll tell you what, right now there's a lot of demand for Salesforce developers.
Right.
So if you learn that skill, it's a good job to have.
So Reid, where do you see things going in the next 5 years?
I think the next 5 years are going to be really interesting. It's really hard to predict the future. You can't see everything that's going to come out, but the trends that we've seen are likely going to continue.
Yeah.
You're going to have smaller and smaller devices that are more and more powerful, that are more capable of connecting to other devices than ever before. And so I think what's really going to be interesting in the next 5 years is when you start to get these really small devices that have incredibly long lives out in the field with no power connection, just driven by battery, and are automatically connected to the network.
Yeah.
Once you start to have that kind of thing that's really available, broadly available, and as cheap as a doorknob or as a tripod, something like that, I think what you're going to see is that the people who are doing the innovative thinking, the experimental work, they're going to come up with solutions that neither you or I could even predict today.
So that's a pretty exciting time.
It's a very exciting time. It's always fun to see what people are doing.
Yeah. Well, Reid, thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, my pleasure. This is great.
Oh, great. And thank you very much for joining Decoding the New Economy.